The cameras cut through the haze of murmurs and shifting papers, catching the chamber at its tensest moment in years. Every seat is filled, every face taut with anticipation, as if the air itself is waiting to explode. Sunlight slants through high windows like a spotlight on a stage, illuminating the two figures at the center of the storm. One sits upright, eyes glinting with polished confidence, the embodiment of old power and its smug certainties. The other leans forward, calm yet unflinching, a quiet force of resolve whose very presence unsettles the status quo. Did you even read the Constitution you swore to uphold? The question rips across the room like a bolt of thunder, silencing whispers, freezing scrolling thumbs mid-text. It's the kind of moment that doesn't just happen, it erupts. Headlines are born in seconds. Across the nation, thousands of screens replay the clip, each viewer feeling that same jolt of disbelief and recognition. Something historic is unfolding right now. The villain smirks, but the expression falters under the weight of the crowd's sudden hush. He's not used to being challenged. His empire of talking points, his aura of untouchable authority, all of it teeters as cameras zoom in and live streams spike. The hero does not blink, does not look away. Years of preparation, scars of personal struggle, and an unshakable belief in dignity fuel this moment. Social feeds begin to hum with outrage and hope at once. Hashtags multiply, comment sections ignite. In living rooms and subway cars, immigrants and children of immigrants watch and whisper, "Finally!" This isn't just a confrontation, it's a reclamation of space long denied, a living refusal to be diminished. But beneath the electrifying scene lies a deeper tension, a question burning in every viewer's chest. What pushed these two to this point? Why now? Why here? Why this clash? As the villain shifts in his chair, attempting to regain composure, and the hero's voice steadies for the next line, the chamber feels less like a hearing and more like the opening act of a trial for the soul of the nation itself. And the next word spoken will change everything.
Long before that question cut through the chamber like a blade, the stage for this confrontation had been quietly, inexorably set. Weeks of hearings, years of grievances, and generations of lived experience converged in a single flashpoint. The committee's agenda had looked routine on paper. Another oversight session, another panel of witnesses. But beneath the bureaucratic surface churned a collision of worldviews. On one side stood a figure who had mastered the art of intimidation and procedural obstruction, wielding power as though it were a family heirloom. On the other side sat a leader shaped by sacrifice and service, carrying the hopes of communities that had been told time and again to wait their turn. This moment mattered because it wasn't just about policy or partisanship. It was about belonging. It was about who gets to claim the mantle of real American and who gets pushed to the margins. For decades, certain voices had been permitted to dominate public discourse, while others were silenced, mocked, or tokenized. But here, under the stark lights of the hearing room and the unblinking gaze of millions online, that old hierarchy was beginning to crack. The clash unfolding wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable reckoning with a system that had long treated empathy as weakness and power as birthright. The villain, sensing the ground shift beneath him, doubled down on dog whistles and procedural traps, hoping to bait his opponent into a stumble. Yet every barb and insinuation only highlighted the contrast between them. He raised his eyebrows with feigned disbelief. He interrupted, he scoffed, he leaned on outdated stereotypes, convinced they would still land in 2025 as they had in decades past. But each time he did, the hero's calm stare and measured words rewrote the script in real time, transforming provocation into proof of resilience. Outside the chamber, America itself was holding its breath. News alerts pinged on phones. Hashtags sprouted in every corner of the digital world. Hashtag stand tall. Hashtag truth in power. Hashtag no going back. College students in crowded cafeterias, parents scrolling at midnight, and retirees watching daytime coverage all sensed that this wasn't just another viral clip. It was a test of national character, of whether dignity and truth could withstand the spectacle of arrogance. And yet, as dramatic as the opening exchange had been, the real storm had only begun to form. The hero's allies were quietly preparing a series of revelations that would undercut the villain's narrative at its root. Supporters inside the room were already exchanging knowing glances. Something was coming, something that would expose hypocrisy not just as a character flaw, but as a public danger. The villain seemed oblivious, convinced the old playbook still worked. This is why the stakes feel so high. For immigrants, for children of immigrants, for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong, this confrontation is more than just political theater. It's personal vindication. It's a signal that the tide can turn, that courage can puncture privilege, that the word American is big enough for every accent, every origin story, every dream. As the hearing rolls on, the room vibrates with that electric sense of possibility, the hush before thunder. The hero shifts slightly, preparing to speak again. Somewhere across the country, a young viewer leans closer to the screen, knowing instinctively they're watching history breathe. And in the charged silence between questions and answers, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. What happens next changes everything. Long before the cameras captured his smirk and the tremor behind it, the man now seated at the witness table was already a symbol of power's darker inheritance. Born into a dynasty of insiders, he had never known a world where doors didn't open for him. Prep schools groomed him, elite internships polished him, and by the time he reached national prominence, he carried himself as though he were not elected but ordained. In his biography, the word service appeared often, but those who had crossed his path recognized it less as public duty and more as self-service, a ladder built from favors, donations, and calculated outrage. His rise was paved with contradictions. In one breath he would thunder about real American values, invoking family, grit, and self-reliance. In the next, he would quietly funnel taxpayer funds into subsidies for the corporations that bankrolled his campaigns. He railed against special treatment, yet his own career was a mosaic of exceptions granted, penalties waived, and scandals spun into nothing by compliant allies. The same man who lectured immigrants about earning their place had inherited his own without ever questioning the path. In televised interviews, he played the role of truth-teller, but behind closed doors staffers whispered about his contempt for the very voters he claimed to defend. Leaked emails revealed him mocking constituents as useful optics, bragging about manipulating hearings to score sound bites rather than solutions. He had perfected the sneer, the cutting off of questions mid-sentence, the patronizing nod meant to shrink an opponent on live TV. Each move was a performance designed to reinforce a myth that he was untouchable, that his word was the final one. And for years it worked. Networks clamored for his fiery sound bites. Fundraisers glowed under his presence. Lobbyists treated him like a prince. Yet in that glow lurked a shadow, his record, quietly accumulating contradictions that no spin could conceal forever. The same man who thundered against government waste had steered contracts to companies owned by his college roommates. The same man who invoked family values had paid hush money to cover his own indiscretions. Each double standard left a crack in the facade, waiting for someone with enough courage and clarity to pry it open. The hearing in which he now sat was supposed to be routine, another chance to demonstrate dominance. His aides had prepped him with talking points and gotcha questions meant to corner his opponent. They had rehearsed the timing, the camera angles, even the tone of his laugh. Yet none of them understood how much the country had changed. The old dog whistles had become clumsy air horns. The smugness that once read as authority now looked like arrogance. Millions who once tuned in for spectacle were tuning in for substance, and they were beginning to see the seams. Contrast him with the person seated opposite. Where he had inherited power, she had earned credibility. Where he paraded his credentials, she bore scars of personal struggle. Where he sought applause, she sought answers. The juxtaposition became impossible to ignore. Even before a single substantive exchange took place, the body language told a story of entitlement versus endurance, bluster versus calm. His arrogance wasn't merely personal, it was strategic. By projecting invulnerability, he hoped to deter scrutiny. By interrupting opponents, he aimed to deny them humanity. He calculated that intimidation would obscure his contradictions. But under the relentless lights and the collective attention of an audience hungry for accountability, that strategy began to fray. Every smirk, every dismissive wave of his hand became a tell, an unspoken confession of fear disguised as dominance. The cracks widened further when journalists unearthed the paper trail. Reports surfaced of his offshore accounts, his back-channel meetings with lobbyists, his attempts to block relief funds for communities he privately derided as not our problem. Each revelation landed like a drumbeat, punctuating the contrast between rhetoric and reality. He dismissed them as smears, yet his voice trembled slightly during interviews, betraying a man who understood the ground shifting beneath him. And still, he clung to the performance. He arrived at the hearing in a designer suit that fit like armor, armed with talking points that felt increasingly brittle. He believed his opponent would be flustered by interruptions, cowed by insinuations, diminished by his theatrical size. But each tactic backfired. The more he tried to provoke, the more measured and unshaken she became. In that dynamic, viewers saw not only a clash of personalities, but a revelation of character. Across the country, especially among immigrant families and young voters, his persona now read as a cautionary tale. His story was no longer simply about one man's hypocrisy, but about a system that enabled it. In chat threads and comment sections, viewers began to catalog his contradictions like exhibits in a trial. "He says hard work matters, but look at how he got here," one post read. Another noted, "He calls others un-American, but hides money overseas." The digital chorus formed a mirror he could not escape, reflecting back an image of entitlement grown brittle under scrutiny. And as the cameras rolled, a sense of inevitability crept in. Not just that he might lose this exchange, but that the mythology around him might be cracking permanently. The hearing had started as another opportunity for him to dominate the narrative. Instead, it was becoming a stage on which his contradictions would be illuminated in high definition. Somewhere deep down he must have sensed it. Perhaps it flickered in the way his fingers drummed the table, or in the flash of uncertainty behind his polished smile. He had built a career on controlling the tempo of confrontation, but here the tempo belonged to someone else. As he prepared his next interruption, the hero opposite him inhaled slowly, ready to unleash a line of questioning that would turn those contradictions into a spotlight. The room's energy shifted again, the way it does before an earthquake, subtle, then unmistakable. For years he had been the one setting traps. Now, for the first time, he was walking into one, and everyone watching could feel it. The downfall he thought impossible was not only plausible, but imminent, and the next exchange would show just how fragile his empire of arrogance had become.
Long before the cameras cast her as a national figure, she was a girl standing on the worn linoleum of a small apartment kitchen, watching her parents count coins to make rent. Her father drove trucks through snowstorms and summer heat. Her mother worked late shifts in a nursing home, tending to strangers while her own hands cracked from overwork. At night they gathered around the kitchen table, speaking softly in the language of the country they had left behind and in the English they were still learning. In that tiny space between worlds, she absorbed a lesson no classroom could teach. Dignity is not granted, it is forged. She grew up translating doctor's notes, rent agreements, and school forms before she was 10 years old. In a neighborhood where ambition often collided with walls of indifference, she treated every assignment as if it were a passport to freedom. Teachers noticed her curiosity, her ability to ask questions others were afraid to ask. By high school, she was leading community meetings, lobbying for a bus stop closer to the housing complex, and mentoring younger kids caught between languages. Even then, her voice carried the calm steadiness that would later silence a congressional chamber. College was another battlefield. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at dawn, tutoring at night, to cover tuition. On weekends, she organized voter registration drives, standing in the cold with clipboards and conviction. Her professors recalled not just her grades, but her composure under pressure, the way she would listen fully before responding, and then deliver a question so precise it left even seasoned academics startled. She was never the loudest voice in the room, but always the one who shifted its center of gravity. After graduating, she chose public service over lucrative offers. First as a legal aid attorney, then as a community organizer, she became a lifeline for people society had taught to keep their heads down. She helped immigrant families navigate courtrooms, fought for tenants facing eviction, and built coalitions across divides that others called impossible. When opponents tried to paint her as naive, she responded with data and lived experience. When they tried to intimidate her, she responded with a steady gaze and unshakable courtesy. Each confrontation added a layer of armor, not the brittle kind built of ego, but the supple strength of someone who has nothing to hide. It was during these years that she honed the skills now on display in the chamber, the patience to let an opponent overplay their hand, the strategic calm to time a rebuttal for maximum effect, the empathy to translate complex policy into human stakes. She understood in her bones how power could distort truth, but also how truth could outlast power. This understanding became her compass, guiding her through hearings, interviews, and the countless small indignities designed to push her off balance. Yet her journey was not without setbacks. She lost early campaigns. She endured smear articles questioning her loyalty, her accent, her faith. She faced hecklers at town halls and condescension from colleagues who assumed she would stay quiet. But each setback was a rehearsal for resilience. She learned to see every dismissal as proof of the space she was carving open. And in each defeat, she built alliances with those who saw in her not just a candidate, but a mirror of their own fight for recognition. By the time she entered national office, she carried not just a resume, but a living testament to the communities she served. Her speeches wove together policy and personal memory. Her questioning in hearings blended moral clarity with forensic precision. Commentators noted her unusual ability to stay composed under provocation, but few understood how deeply that composure was rooted in survival. The survival of a family, a community, an identity that refused to be erased. In the months leading to the confrontation now unfolding, she studied her opponent's record as carefully as she had once studied legal briefs for clients on the brink of deportation. She understood his patterns, his preferred traps, even the rhythms of his speech. She knew he would underestimate her. He always had. And she planned not simply to answer his provocations, but to invert them, transforming each attack into a window onto his contradictions. This is what makes her uniquely prepared for the moment at hand. Where others see only a clash of personalities, she sees an opportunity to make invisible people visible. Where her opponent wields spectacle, she wields substance.
Where he hopes to provoke a flash of anger, she channels decades of practiced composure. She knows that one well-timed question can expose an empire of hypocrisy, and one pause can make a room hold its breath. As she sits at the hearing table, she can feel the weight of all the people who paved her way: parents, neighbors, mentors, clients. She recalls her mother's cracked hands, her father's quiet endurance, the faces of families who trusted her to fight for them. Every detail of her life, every struggle, and every triumph has been an apprenticeship for this confrontation. And she also senses the future leaning in, young viewers who see in her the possibility of their own paths, communities long dismissed who suddenly glimpse themselves at the center of the national story, allies across the aisle quietly rooting for her composure to prevail over bluster, even critics, watching closely, bracing for a moment they cannot spin away. The chamber is tense, but she is steady. Her hands rest lightly on the table, her notes arranged but mostly unnecessary. She has prepared, but more than that, she has lived. And living through what she has lived through means she does not fear the glare, the sneers, or the interruption about to come. She is ready not just to answer questions, but to reshape the conversation. In this instant, before the next exchange begins, she draws a slow breath. It's the same breath she once took before stepping into a courtroom on behalf of a terrified client, before knocking on doors in neighborhoods where no one knew her name, before standing up at town halls to demand bus routes, housing rights, and dignity. It is a breath of steadiness, of resolve, of knowing that history can pivot on a single sentence spoken without flinching. The villain opposite her shifts in his seat, eyes narrowing, convinced the next round of questioning will unsettle her. But he has never understood the reservoir she draws from, the years of preparing for moments exactly like this. And as she looks up, locking eyes with him, she feels the chamber lean forward too, sensing the same unspoken promise. What she is about to say will not only answer him, but it will echo far beyond these walls, and it will change everything that follows.
The room's temperature seems to rise with each exchange, a humid tension pressing down on every spectator. Microphones crackle, chairs creak, and camera lenses zoom closer, as if the machines themselves can sense the coming rupture. The villain leans forward, his voice sharpening to a blade. "Answer the question directly," he snaps, jabbing a finger toward her. "Or are you trying to dodge because you know the truth will destroy your narrative?" His words ricochet across the chamber like small grenades, designed to provoke, to unseat, to turn composure into chaos. She doesn't flinch. She blinks once, as if brushing away dust, then meets his stare with the same measured calm she's carried from the first moment. Her voice, when it comes, is low, but unmistakably clear. "I am answering directly. You just don't like the answer." The line lands softly, yet with seismic force, triggering murmurs from the gallery. It's not a zinger, but a revelation of power, control of tone, control of tempo, control of the narrative. Frustrated, he raises his volume, layering his attack with insinuations about her motives, her background, even her right to question him. "People like you," he says, "think you can rewrite the rules. You've never built anything. You've never sacrificed like real Americans have." The chamber gasps. Reporters scramble to tweet. In living rooms across the country, viewers exchange incredulous looks. It's the oldest move in his playbook, and the ugliest, questioning someone's belonging as a way of erasing their argument. But she doesn't rise to the bait. Instead, she tilts her head slightly, almost pitying him. "My parents built their lives from nothing, and they taught me that serving your community is the highest form of sacrifice." She lets the words hang, neither defensive nor angry, but anchored in truth. That contrast becomes its own spectacle. His thunder against her stillness, his scorn against her dignity. He interrupts again, trying to drown her out. "You're twisting facts," he barks, cheeks reddening. "You're out of your depth." The repetition of personal jabs, unoriginal, increasingly frantic, makes his confidence appear brittle.
Each attempt to dominate only highlights his loss of control. Cameras catch the perspiration at his temples, the impatient drumming of his fingers. Viewers sense it too, a predator discovering that its prey is not only unafraid, but prepared. Meanwhile, she leans in with pointed questions, each one grounded in evidence. She cites dates, memos, and contradictions, stitching together a quiet indictment while he sputters. She never raises her voice, but every syllable tightens the noose of facts. Social media feeds flare up again. Hashtag stay calm trends alongside hashtag losing it. Clips circulate of her poised expression, his agitated body language. Memes appear within minutes, her gaze set against his scowl, captioned with one word: balance. The hearing room itself seems to pivot around her composure. Allies exchange discreet smiles. Even neutral staffers pause their typing to watch. The villain's once reliable tactics, sarcasm, interruption, intimidation, are failing in real time, exposed under the lights like stage tricks in daylight. The more he shouts, the more presidential she appears. At one point he slams a binder shut, the echo ringing like a gavel. "This is outrageous," he mutters, but the microphones pick it up. His veneer of control cracks a little more. She, by contrast, allows a moment of silence to stretch, just long enough for viewers to register the difference between volume and authority. When she speaks again, it's with the precision of someone who has rehearsed not the words, but the courage. Across the country, the confrontation becomes a shared ritual, people huddled around phones and laptops, whispering to one another about what they're witnessing. For immigrants and their children, it feels like a vindication. For skeptics, it's a reintroduction to the possibility of dignity in politics. And for the villain, it's an unraveling. He adjusts his tie. He glances toward his aides. He tries one last insult, reaching for a slur that might stick. She doesn't blink. "You seem rattled," she says quietly. "Shall we return to the facts?" The question is surgical, slicing through the theater. It's not just a rebuttal. It's an invitation to dignity he cannot accept without surrendering the fight. He opens his mouth, closes it again. For the first time, the audience sees him hesitate, the mask slipping, a flash of uncertainty where arrogance once ruled. The chamber holds its breath. Somewhere a pen drops. The cameras zoom in, hunting for the moment when the power dynamic reverses completely. The villain straightens his back, as though to recover his old posture, but the tremor in his hand betrays him. She prepares her next line, a revelation, an irrefutable piece of evidence she's saved for exactly this moment. And then, just as she draws a breath to speak, the chair recognizes a procedural pause. The microphones cut, the room stirs, and the tension breaks only enough to leave every witness and viewer suspended in the same question. What exactly is she about to unveil, and how will it shatter the story he's built around himself?
For a moment, the chamber hums with the leftover vibration of the villain's outburst. Papers rustling, cameras whirring, the faint sound of someone clearing their throat. Then a hush descends, a strange collective awareness that something irreversible is about to happen. The hero straightens her notes but does not look down at them. She has prepared, yes, but she is not reading now. She is remembering, summoning the long arc of evidence and lived experience that brought her here. "Let's walk through the facts," she begins softly, her voice a thread that pulls every ear toward her. Slowly, together. The words are not just a challenge, but an invitation, a recentering of gravity. The villain shifts in his seat, clearly expecting another round of sparring, but the room feels different now. She lifts one document, an internal memo stamped with his office's letterhead. "This," she says, holding it aloft, "was sent under your name 3 years ago." She pauses, letting the silence build like a drum roll. "It directed funds away from the very communities you promised to protect." She sets it down with deliberate calm. Cameras flash.
Aides whisper behind their hands. The villain forces a laugh, but it lands brittle and hollow. Another document slides forward, then another, each one a shard of truth. She traces dates and signatures, revealing a pattern of double standards he thought buried in bureaucracy. The crowd murmurs as the puzzle pieces align. She never raises her voice. She lets the document speak. Between each reveal, she allows a heartbeat of silence, the kind that makes a person's pulse audible in their ears. On the campaign trail, you called families like mine a burden. But in private meetings, she holds up an email now, you lobbied for subsidies that benefited your own interests overseas. Gasps ripple through the chamber. Journalists hunch over their laptops, pounding keys. The villain's face flushes, his fingers drumming faster on the table. He reaches for his water, but his hand trembles slightly, splashing a drop onto the polished wood. She does not pounce. She waits. This patience is its own power, forcing him to inhabit the awkward silence between accusation and explanation. When she speaks again, it is with precision honed over decades. You've said again and again that sacrifice defines patriotism. I agree, but sacrifice means putting others first, not profiting from their pain. And that's what these records show. Social media explodes. Hashtags trending, reaction clips spreading. People in coffee shops, classrooms, and living rooms lean closer to their screens, feeling like witnesses to a trial centuries in the making. For immigrant families, it's a reversal of the script they know too well. No longer accused, but accuser. No longer pleading, but proving. The villain attempts a counterattack, muttering about context and smears, but his voice lacks conviction. Each interruption makes him appear smaller, not stronger. That's taken out of context, he says again, but she is ready. Let's provide the context then, she replies, scrolling to a projected slide that shows his votes lined up against his rhetoric, a devastating before and after. She takes a breath, steady and audible. You've said again and again, claiming to speak for the voiceless, but your record, she taps the papers, shows you silencing them for profit. And when confronted, you belittle and interrupt rather than explain. Her tone remains even, but the chamber vibrates with the force of her words. It's not shouting, it's stripping away illusion. The villain looks toward the chairperson, perhaps hoping for a procedural rescue, but none comes. The cameras catch the moment, his eyes darting, the edges of his mouth tight. He opens his mouth as if to unleash another insult, then closes it. The silence that follows is louder than any outburst. She presses on, revealing a final piece of evidence, a whistleblower's testimony corroborated by receipts. This isn't just about hypocrisy, it's about harm, real harm done to real people. Her voice softens, recounting one case in detail. A small-town clinic closed after funding was diverted, a family forced to relocate, a child denied care. The chamber shifts from scandal to stakes. The villain's contradictions become not only political, but personal. And then she pauses. She looks out across the room, not at him, but at the faces beyond the cameras. This is why I'm here, not for a soundbite, not for a headline, but because this country belongs to all of us, and the truth belongs to everyone. The words hang like a banner, impossible to ignore. Gasps, then applause ripple from the back of the room. The chair raps the gavel for order, but even the gavel sounds like punctuation to her point. On social feeds, emojis of raised fists and fire flood timelines. The villain dabs at his forehead with a folded handkerchief, his once imperious posture slumping into something smaller, human, and suddenly accountable. She isn't finished.
In a calm, deliberate cadence, she connects the dots between her actions and the broader themes of belonging and justice. For generations, families like mine were told to wait, to keep our heads down, to accept the crumbs. Today, we're not waiting, we're not silent, and we're not accepting double standards anymore. Her voice rises slightly, not in anger, but in clarity, like a chord resolving. The villain, cornered, attempts a counterattack with a joke. "Sounds like you're running for office," he says, half smirking. She tilts her head. "I already hold office," she answers. Laughter breaks out in the gallery, not cruel, but cathartic. It's the sound of a room realizing the old power dynamic is gone. But she knows the mic drop moment isn't a single zinger. It's the culmination of patience, truth, and timing. She lets the laughter settle, then leans forward one last time. "You've had years to explain these contradictions," she says softly. "This is your chance." She gestures toward the microphone in front of him, a literal and figurative offer. "Take it." He hesitates. His lips part, but no words come. Cameras catch the micro-expressions of a man at the edge of his own mythology. The silence stretches, a canyon he cannot cross. She waits, serene, embodying the very composure he tried to shatter. Across the country, viewers hold their breath, sensing the power of a moment that transcends politics. It's a drama of inversion, the underdog wielding truth as armor, the once invincible power broker revealed as vulnerable. Every immigrant who ever had to prepare twice as hard for half as much sees themselves reflected in her steadiness. And then, after what feels like a full minute, but is only seconds, she gathers her papers, signaling that her case is complete. "I have nothing further," she says, the classic courtroom phrase transformed into a nationwide headline. She doesn't slam the documents or raise her voice. She simply closes the folder with a decisive snap. The villain looks around, searching for an ally, but finds only cameras. The gavel comes down again, a hollow sound in the vast room. The hero stands, not in triumph, but in quiet dignity, the weight of history pressing forward. The chamber erupts, not in chaos, but in a low, sustained murmur, like thunder rolling over the plains. She turns slightly toward the gallery, then back to him. "This isn't over," she says softly that only nearby microphones catch it. "It's only the beginning." Her eyes lock on his one last time, not as an adversary, but as a witness to his unraveling. And as she sits back down, a ripple of anticipation surges through the audience, online and in person. Everyone knows another shoe is about to drop, some revelation, some consequence, something that will make today's exchange look like a prelude. The villain lowers his gaze to the table. The composure he once wore as armor now looks like a mask dissolving under heat. She has not shouted, but she has shifted the landscape under his feet. Outside the chamber, headlines are already updating. Commentators are whispering the word historic. Young viewers are texting each other. "Did you see that? Did you see what she just did?" In the long pause that follows, the nation feels itself perched on a threshold. She has delivered her counterattack, but the reverberations are only beginning. The villain still has to respond, or refuse, and either choice will expose him further. The hearing is not over. The story is not finished. And in that suspense, as
The chamber emptied, but the echo of the confrontation lingered, not just in the walls, but across a nation tuned in to witness history. Screens everywhere lit up simultaneously, phones, tablets, laptops, each pinging notifications as social media ignited into a wildfire. Hashtags surged. Hashtag dignity over arrogance. Hashtag truth prevails. Hashtag historic takedown. Clips of her calm, precise dismantling of the villain's claims went viral within minutes, replayed over and over, dissected, shared, and memed. Every pause, every inflection, every raised eyebrow became material for reaction videos, TikTok breakdowns, and Twitter threads that racked up tens of thousands of engagements within the hour. Commentators struggled to keep pace with the digital frenzy. Cable panels buzzed with debate, hosts replaying segments frame by frame, marveling at her poise. "I've never seen anything like it," said one political analyst, gesturing toward the footage. "She didn't just answer, she redefined what it means to hold someone accountable." Across networks, pundits tried to articulate the ripple effect of a single hearing, a calculated, principled dismantling of arrogance on national television, and the instantaneous impact on public perception. Celebrities joined the chorus, tweeting admiration, retweeting clips, and using their platforms to amplify the moment. Influencers dissected her strategy in short-form videos, drawing lessons for negotiation, leadership, and public service. Some joked about her composure as "my new leadership goals," while others highlighted the moral clarity she displayed. Memes surfaced, contrasting her calm with his visibly rattled demeanor, humor serving as both entertainment and subtle political commentary. The cultural conversation had shifted in real time. What had been a courtroom-style hearing became a shared national experience, a lesson in dignity and strategy for anyone who felt overlooked or underestimated. Politicians across the spectrum could not ignore the shockwaves. Allies flooded social media with praise, framing her performance as a demonstration of courage under pressure and a model for public accountability. Opponents, careful not to outright concede, nonetheless reacted with tempered acknowledgement, realizing that her methodical dismantling of the villain's record had reshaped the narrative. Committee members, even on opposing sides, offered private praise in whispered hallway conversations and carefully worded statements, signaling that history had witnessed something extraordinary. The villain, by contrast, was already in crisis mode. Analysts dissected his every facial expression and flubbed line, noting the cracks in the armor he had relied on for decades. Headlines emphasized the contrast, one side of the chamber poised, unwavering, principled, the other defensive, rattled, exposed. Public perception was shifting from spectacle to accountability, and he was at the center of a story now controlled by the hero. Online, users compiled threads cataloging his contradictions, each point punctuated with screenshots, timestamps, and social commentary. His credibility, once seemingly untouchable, was under relentless scrutiny. The ripples extended beyond the moment itself. Nonprofits and advocacy groups amplified her words to support broader causes, linking her calm defiance to campaigns for social justice, immigrant rights, and government transparency. Classroom discussions emerged within hours, teachers sharing clips as examples of leadership and critical thinking. Local newspapers in towns across the country ran feature stories on the families represented by her advocacy, reminding readers that the stakes of this hearing were real lives, not just abstract policy. Even late-night shows joined the conversation, framing her performance as both inspiring and historic. The clips became recurring motifs, interspersed with commentary that underscored the cultural significance of the confrontation. Comedians and satirists, while joking, treated her with an unusual reverence, acknowledging her precision and integrity. The collective impression was unmistakable. She had not only won the debate, she had shifted the national mood. The effect on grassroots movements was immediate. Volunteers and young activists shared her clips widely, using the moment as evidence that persistence, preparation, and principled courage could prevail over bluster and entitlement. Communities long accustomed to marginalization felt represented in her triumph. Social media feeds were flooded with testimonials from individuals describing how they felt seen and empowered, how her performance validated their own struggles and reinforced their belief that integrity could challenge entrenched systems. Even policy discussions began to bear her influence. Lawmakers and advisors, once focused on procedural maneuvering, started framing their narratives in ways that mirrored her approach: calm, evidence-based, morally grounded. Journalists noted the subtle but undeniable shift in tone, suggesting that her method had set a new standard for how hearings and public accountability should unfold. The national discourse was beginning to pivot, guided by the resonance of her example. By the end of the day, the chamber itself was a ghost of the storm that had just passed. The villain retreated into damage control, his aides attempting to contain the fallout, but the narrative was no longer theirs to write. Across the country, citizens had taken up the mantle, sharing clips, dissecting strategies, debating implications, and celebrating a display of integrity that felt both aspirational and deeply personal. In homes, offices, and public spaces, the shared experience created an electric sense of participation. Witnesses not only to a confrontation, but to the reaffirmation that courage, clarity, and preparation could triumph over arrogance and entitlement. Across timelines, in classrooms, on late-night panels, and in casual conversation, one question lingered with growing intensity: what would come next? Because in moments like these, the aftershocks do not fade, they ripple outward, reshaping expectations, inspiring action, and leaving the nation collectively holding its breath for the next act.
The chamber settles into a rare silence, not the hollow quiet of exhaustion, but the deep stillness of reflection. The villain has retreated into the shadows of his own contradictions, leaving the hero not just victorious, but unshaken. She leans slightly forward, letting the weight of the moment sink in for everyone present. Then she speaks, not to attack, not to humiliate, but to elevate. This isn't about one person, she begins, voice steady, carrying the cadence of lived truth. It's about all of us, about what it means to live with integrity in a world that often rewards arrogance, about standing for what is right, even when the loudest voices insist you should stay silent. Our value is not measured by the power we inherit, but by the courage we summon, the lives we uplift, and the dignity we preserve for ourselves and for each other. She pauses, letting the words settle like stones in a quiet river. In that moment, the audience feels the weight of history, the echoes of every immigrant story, every struggle against injustice, every person who has ever been underestimated. She reframes the conflict that had dominated headlines not as a simple duel between two personalities, but as a universal lesson that service matters more than self-interest, that empathy transcends entitlement, that truth endures beyond spectacle. This is not victory for me alone, she continues, but a reminder that when we act with courage and clarity, we create space for others, for the families who have been told they don't belong, for the communities who have been ignored, for the children watching tonight who need to see that their voices, their dreams, and their identities matter. Her words are not just statements. They are a bridge connecting lived experience with aspiration, a call to action that transcends politics. Outside the chamber, the digital world mirrors her message. Social feeds flood with praise and reflection, not just admiration for the confrontation, but resonance with the moral clarity she embodies. Dignity matters, and service over self trend globally. Clips of her calm defiance are shared alongside personal stories, a nurse recalling the first time she felt seen, a student celebrating the courage to speak out in class, a parent encouraging a child to embrace their heritage. The hero's message becomes a touchstone for validation and inspiration,
a signal that integrity has tangible power. She shifts slightly. Her gaze sweeps the room, absorbing the faces of those who witnessed the moment firsthand. When we stand for truth, even in the face of intimidation, we remind ourselves that dignity cannot be borrowed or taken. It is earned through courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. And when we extend that dignity to others, we begin to repair a world that has too often overlooked the value of every human life. Her crescendo builds not with volume, but with the weight of conviction. Each sentence tightens the connection between personal responsibility and collective empowerment. She speaks of sacrifice, service, and moral courage, not as abstract ideals, but as living principles that shape daily choices and long-term legacy. The room leans in. Every listener senses that this is more than a hearing, more than a viral clip. It is a blueprint for ethical action in the face of adversity. This is the lesson, she says, that transcends headlines, chambers, and partisan lines, that courage outlasts intimidation, integrity outshines arrogance, and service defines us more than ancestry, wealth, or status ever could. Each of us has a role in shaping a society that values justice, empathy, and opportunity above ego. And in doing so, we honor those who came before and pave the way for those who follow. The villain's retreating presence is irrelevant now. The story is no longer about him. The focus has shifted to what she represents, a living testament to perseverance, moral clarity, and the transformative power of principled action. The audience feels the lift, the inspiration that comes from witnessing someone turn confrontation into affirmation, attack into teaching, and chaos into clarity. As she closes, she smiles faintly, not triumphant, but resolute. The camera lingers on her for a heartbeat, capturing the quiet authority of a person who has lived her values long before the spotlight. The words resonate, leaving viewers with a sense of possibility, that courage can redefine narratives, that truth can reshape systems, that dignity and service are not mere ideals, but actionable forces capable of transforming lives. And in that moment, the moral is clear. When we act with integrity, when we elevate the voices of the marginalized, when we place service above self, we create a legacy far greater than any single confrontation. The audience, both in the chamber and across the nation, exhales collectively, inspired and reminded that the fight for justice is ongoing. But so too is the capacity for hope, for courage, and for a better future that belongs to everyone.
And so, as the dust settles from this historic exchange, we return to the moment that captured our attention in the first place, the day Judge Gregg Costa questioned Jasmine Crockett aggressively, and she responded with a clapback that left him speechless. What began as a confrontation steeped in tension became a lesson in courage, composure, and the transformative power of speaking truth to power. It was a reminder that dignity can withstand arrogance, that preparation and principle can outshine bluster, and that the voices long ignored are more than capable of reshaping the conversation. This story is more than headlines or viral clips. It is a reflection of the values we all can carry forward. Service matters more than status. Empathy matters more than entitlement. Integrity matters more than theatrics. And when we choose to uphold these values, we create ripple effects that reach far beyond one chamber, one hearing, or one viral moment. Every word spoken in courage becomes a beacon for those seeking justice, validation, and hope. Now, this is your moment too. Share this story with someone who needs to see that truth and dignity are powerful. Subscribe to stay connected to stories that inspire action and amplify voices that matter.
Comment below with the values you hold dear and the moments when you've stood firm, reminding the world and yourself that integrity never goes unnoticed. Be part of this movement. Let the courage displayed today guide your actions tomorrow. Together, we can amplify voices, challenge arrogance, and make the principles of justice, empathy, and service not just ideals, but reality. This is more than a story. It's a call to live boldly, speak clearly, and stand unwaveringly for what is right. The moment has passed the chamber. Now it's in our hands.